So clearly, we need to fix that. There's two other things I think we do backwards. Number one is we talk to people as if voting is an individual act, and that each person has to search their conscience to see whether or not they should vote. Voting is a social act, and it's an act that's exercised as a member of a group. Those of you up there who are elected officials know that you cannot survive in politics if you try to get to know every single individual, but you certainly know the groups in your district. I don't tell my students their vote matters. I don't tell them about elections one by one vote. I tell them what matters is whether people like you think people like them vote. In other words, it's a social act. In fact, I told them if you can get 50 students to vote, you could stay home because you've done a social act. And that's why turning voting into a social act, not an individual act, is so important. And that's why I do like this idea of voting places. I'd have food and music and have people visit and enjoy dropping off your ballot. You know, in the old days, 100 years ago, voting was a party. It was something people did for fun, and there was food and drink involved. Probably too much drink, but we can't go there, but non-alcoholic drink here in Southern California. The last two, though, are going to be really a little bit dicier for you. The most powerful motivator for people to vote are things that we've sort of decided aren't such good things. One of them is the political party. The other one is racial and ethnic identification. If you look at the data that Paul gathered for our report, the one election in Los Angeles in recent years where the Latino vote percentage exceeded the percentage of their registration was when Antonio Villaraigosa was elected mayor in 2005. There's not a single Asian American elected official in the city of Los Angeles, and I can't imagine that's not connected to a feeling in the Asian American community of not seeing representatives to whom they can have a direct relationship. These things matter. But the biggest one is political party. And we've gone to great lengths to convince people that anything involving parties is bad. It introduces something called conflict. I think conflict is good in politics if it's about important things. If it's about your personality or something about you personally, it's not that important. But if candidate A is going to do something really that differs from candidate B, and that difference can be shown to be connected to party, I will tell you this. Every political scientist will tell you that parties have been the best way to mobilize working class voters in American history. Now, you may not like this particular proposal, but I'm not a fan of the top two primary. Not because I don't think it's fun, and as commentators, it's absolutely one of the greatest things that's ever invented, because you can make numerous predictions with no evidence whatsoever about who's going to finish anywhere. But for the voter, it violates the fundamental rule that we should always be pursuing, which is simplicity and clarity in all things. The party primary, which is open to everybody, that type of party primary where anybody can, even if you're not a member of the party, can vote, should not have been replaced by something which is wonderful for strategists, but terrible for voters, especially for voters for whom the party queue is very, very significant. It was said earlier, I think Kathy Fung said it, that there's this danger of the parties driving people out of the races. Actually, that's a result of the top two primary because of the fear that the party will get sort of aced out of having their candidate in the final election. Now they're clearing the field. I predict in a year or two there will be party conventions to choose candidates pre-selected before the top two primary, and that is certainly not what people intended. I think it's much more important to have queues, to have simplicity, to have fewer elections that mean more. If I ran the zoo, as Dr. Seuss used to say, I would clear them all out except a small number of elections that really matter, that really make a difference. I would turn many elected offices into appointed offices. I would make sure that bodies that don't have an elected executive have an elected executive. And in truth, if you did all those things and had automatic registration to get that out of the way, I think you'd be surprised what would happen. I don't want you to give up on young voters. I don't want you to give up on the voters of Southern California. The worst thing you can do is get into a mode of what is it about these people that causes them not to vote? Because if you go back to the notion that voters are not fools, they're doing exactly what they consider reasonable in their lives and the place that politics has in their lives. And right now, unfortunately, since we have a bizarre system in which you elect a president in year one, and then 2 years later elect a president who vows to destroy the president, then 2 years later you re-elect the president, and then 2 years later you elect more people who don't like the president, and then you say it's astonishing that nothing gets done. It's very difficult. It's a difficult system, which leads to the last thing, and then I'll stop, which is civic education. It's not just that we need civic education, it's what we need to have in that civic education. And that has to be, I think about this as a social activity, about politics and government as a social activity, about understanding that unfortunately we have a weird system where if you vote every 4 years, you won't get what you want. Lastly, I think it sometimes motivates people to say, if your vote doesn't count, why are there so many states in the United States when people are trying to take away your vote? People are not aware of that because in California, we're all trying to help people to vote. But that's actually not the story of what's going on in the rest of the country. I think if you do that, you're going to be surprised because every young person I talk to is filled with interest about issues and they couldn't care less about candidates. But they're absolutely interested in issues. So make fewer elections about those issues, and I think you'll be astonished at what the turnout is. Thanks.
With that, we're going to make a slight adjustment and invite the founder of the African American Voter Education, Representation, and Participation Project, Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas, to add remarks that will be included in the ethnic turnout representation conversation. With that, Supervisor Ridley Thomas, can you come to the podium?
Thank you very much.
I want a picture of this.
Well, we'll accommodate you at the appropriate time.
Picture of democracy.
Pursuant to the chair's permission, Senator. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be here just to share these brief remarks with you. Senator Allen, Assemblyman Ridley Thomas is chairs of the Joint Committee. This is important work. The work that I'm here to speak to is pertaining to the African American Voter Rep Project. A decade plus in existence, many of us have touched it in one way or another. It came into existence pursuant to the work of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Urban League, several leading congregations, First African American, First African Methodist Episcopal Church, and the Faithful Central Bible Church were the original contributors, along with SCIU, feeling that it was critically important that civic engagement took on a focused and intense turn as it relates to African American and urban voters in Los Angeles County. It has now represented itself as the largest such effort in our state, and it is documented as so, having registered some 175,000 voters according to the Los Angeles County Registrar of Voters, who is here to attest to that. He brought his handy little tracker with him to make sure that everything that I say can be documented. This is an important accomplishment, and it is essentially an effort to garner the attention of African American institutions, civic, religious, business, etc., to focus on the historic contribution that this particular electoral sector has made.